The next policy option to look at is public housing. So this is where the government effectively acts as a developer. So it builds new houses, maybe new apartment blocks, on new land, and thereby increases the supply of housing available to the market. In doing so, it would effectively either decrease prices, assuming nothing else occurred, or, assuming demand is gradually increasing, it would dampen the increase in prices. In fact, if the government were able to calculate precisely the increase in the demand, projected increase in demand, and increase the supply of housing to match that, then you would effectively neutralize any price increase. There would be no price increase in the ideal case or in the theoretical case. Here we're not thinking about the government being particularly benevolent. It's not the case that the government is selling extra cheap houses at cost or something like that, but rather, or renting them out at very low rents. It could simply charge the market price or the market rent, whatever that happened to be. So we've got supply and demand in the total market. Now, let's say demand is increasing over time. If the government were to add more houses to the market, so government supplied houses, then we would say the supply would increase. Now, if it did that precisely, we can see that the new equilibrium price would still be at P1, but the equilibrium quantity would now be Q2. If the government did this consciously and speculative investors could see that this was occurring, then this would tend to undermine the speculative price expectation that prices would be going up in the future, which is what fuels the speculative investment in the first place. Incidentally, as a side note, this is a case where the government is simply selling the houses that it supplies to the market at the market price. But we could imagine a scenario where the government kind of creates a sub-market, so a public house market, rather than looking at the private housing market. So in that case, the government might say, okay, we're going to supply a certain number of houses and we're going to means test them, so that it's not just any Tom, Dick and Harry who can go and buy a government-produced house in the marketplace. Rather, it's people on lower incomes, for example. In that case, what we would see for the private market is a decrease in the demand for private housing demand, so that either overall demand would not increase as much as it did before, because you'll have people leaving the private market, or demand not changing at all, or even demand perhaps falling if the public housing program was sufficiently large. In any case, that would also undermine the expectation of higher prices in the future, and thereby undermine the speculative drive behind the housing bubble.